Hi everyone, and welcome to the Millennial Revolt, an independent political talk show that seeks to bring a different narrative than the stale one we have going on right now in the mainstream media. So there is so much to talk about. We're going to be talking about two things and how it ties into each other. We're going to be talking about the Russian plane crash, and we're also going to be talking about the retaliatory measures that President Obama recently took towards Russia by expelling their diplomats from our country, closing down two Russian compounds, and also imposing new sanctions. This is going to have a negative effect because this could possibly damage the détente that President-elect Trump wants to make with Russia. And I've said this numerous times on my channel. I believe that we should be very closely aligned with the Russian government. There's a lot of places that we could work together. There are a lot of interests that we have that we should respect that the Russians might have. We both have our spheres of influence that should be respected. We shouldn't try to, the United States on our part shouldn't try to topple any governments that are loyal to the Russian government and vice versa. But this is very dangerous. This is an action that has not been seen since the Cold War era. I know in my lifetime I haven't seen any of this. So there's so much to discuss, so let's just get right into it. So the first thing that we have to talk about is the Russian plane crash that recently just happened. And I think it's important we talk about this because I think this also ties into what is happening now. Now, the reason why I say this ties into what is happening now, because President Obama and numerous people in the administration or in high positions in the US government was saying that Russia was going to suffer retaliatory measures about supposed hacking of the US election. Now, please keep in mind, when President-elect Trump came out and said that the elections could be hacked, that they could be rigged, President Obama said that there is no way possible for the elections to be rigged. Then when Hillary Clinton lost the Electoral College, which, again, we are a constitutional republic, we are not a direct democracy. Now, many people in the establishment media, the legacy media, all betted for Hillary Clinton. Now, if you were watching this, you would have been very shocked on election night, but many people, myself included in the alternative media, said that Donald Trump was probably going to win. Hillary Clinton didn't have the amount of support that she had. Now, this is neither here nor there because the election is over. But after Hillary Clinton's loss, the Obama administration came out and said that suddenly the Russians hacked the election. Hillary Clinton came out with this as well, also attributing her loss to fake news and saying that the Russians influenced social media platforms to propagate fake news and to help Donald Trump get elected. Now, supposed people in the CIA came out, unnamed officials, the New York Slime ran with this story saying that unnamed CIA officials called and said that Russia hacked the election. Now, mind you, the Obama administration has never provided any evidence for this. We have a so-called bipartisan witch hunt going on, which is purely McCarthyite in nature. It's from the usual candidates, from John McCain and Lindsey Graham. You also have Chuck Schumer. You have Nancy Pelosi jumping on this bandwagon saying that the Russians hacked into our election. Again, this was an inside leak. Julian Assange has said this himself, that somebody from the DNC gave him John Podesta's emails. And we also have the DC leaks, which was a single hacker who hacked into the DNC, and got information from there. So there has been no evidence that anyone has given. There has just been statements and accusations. Now, because of this, President Obama has decided that he is going to retaliate. Now, Keep this context in mind when we begin to talk about the plane crash, because this ties into a few events in my opinion. The Defense Ministry Tupolev 154 was flying to Syria to participate in New Year's celebrations when the plane crashed, killing 92 members aboard the plane. 9 members of the media were among the passengers, with state-run channel Pravli Canal saying 3 of its staff were on board, as well as Russian servicemen and the Alexandrov Assembly, the Army's official musical group internationally known as the Red Army Choir, and humanitarian activists were also on the plane as well. Russian authorities investigating the crash say there was no explosion on board, but they have not ruled out a terrorist attack as one possible cause to the plane going down. Investigators have also said a pilot error, or here's the kicker, or a technical fault were among the most likely causes for the disaster. Now, an EMP, which is an electromagnetic pulse, could also possibly bring this plane down. Not saying that this is what happened in this particular case, but this is what possibly could happen. Electronically attack their systems on the plane. Sergei Bentov, the Russian Air Force head of flight safety, who is serving on a government commission investigating the crash, said that there was no explosion on board. Reports saying that the recovery of 3 black boxes being found on the plane are untrue. So far, only 2 flight recorders have been found and retrieved from the sea floor. Decoding of the second black box started on Wednesday, and the process may take 30 days. Authorities said that some technical malfunctions in the plane likely played a role in the crash, but conclusions cannot be made without official results of the investigation. The primary objective is to identify victims, and that the DNA tests are already underway. However, the process of victim identification may take up to 4 weeks. The plane disappeared from the radar screens 2 minutes after taking off last Sunday from Sochi in southern Russia. Authorities said that the crash site was located with the help of satellite data. On Wednesday, local media reports said that the last words of the pilot of the jet hinted at a wing flap fault as the possible cause of the crash. After retrieving fragments of the military plane wreckage, authorities determined that an explosion or onboard fire was not responsible for the crash. The 4 main versions are a engine being hit by a foreign object, substandard fuel that caused the loss of thrust on and eventually stopped the engines, the pilot's mistake, and the plane's technical failure, Russia's Federal Security Services said in a statement. So there is a lot going on. I personally think that the US government is involved, and I'm not saying that the US is involved in every single tragedy that happens around the world, but given the diplomatic row that we are having with Russia, Russia's involvement into the Syrian conflict legally, by the way, and the US and their coalition illegally entering a sovereign state, bombing, that also plays a part into it. Donald Trump winning the election, and then the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton and her supporters coming out and saying that the Russians have to do with it, and President Obama saying that there would be retaliations could be a cause. Now, I also want people to keep in mind that the Russian ambassador was also killed, and this has quickly just gone out of the news cycle very quickly. He was assassinated in Turkey. Gunmen began ranting about Aleppo before he opened fire, killing the ambassador. Now, it seemed very suspicious to me, given the lax security that was around the ambassador. It could have been an inside job. Now, as I said before, Turkey is a NATO member. Now, strangely enough, a couple of days later, a NATO auditor general was found shot dead. His body was discovered in a car with a gunshot wound to the head. Yells Charlton was 62 years old, and he was found miles from both his home and his office. Now, this could be a tit for tat that is happening between Russia and the United States. The US being basically the head of NATO, using NATO as its proxy. Now, this is just speculation on my part, but wars have been started for less, and we have just seen what President Obama has just done. Now, Belgian police are investigating the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of the high-ranking NATO official, whose responsibilities include probing terror financing after his body was discovered in a car with a gunshot wound to his head. Now, he was found on Friday in Aderlijn with a bullet in his head. An autopsy was performed on Tuesday. The family does not believe it was a suicide, as many reports have indicated. Now, the 62-year-old Auditor General of NATO was found in a Belgian town of Adeline, 62 miles away from his home and office in Lens on December 16th. As Auditor General, Mr. Chelin was responsible for the internal accounting of the NSPA, as well as external investigations into money laundering activities and terrorist financing. And more bizarrely, it had been reported locally that the gun which killed him was found in the glove box of the vehicle. According to local newspapers, Mr. Catalin was a registered keeper of 3 weapons. However, the gun found at the scene did not belong to him. It had been claimed. Police are currently probing whether he had received any threats that could be related to work, and highlighted that the gun used was not registered to his name. Reports get even more confusing when you add in the additional facts about Sheldon's death. The first stated that a farewell letter was found in Sheldon's car. The second stated that the gun used in the apparent suicide was found in the right hand, despite the fact that Chadlin was left-handed. It had been reported that the former director of the Institute of International Auditors, the IIA, Luxembourg, had complained of getting strange phone calls before he died, and he felt threatened. So he could have been killed by the Russians. Not saying that this is what happened. Again, this is purely speculation on my part. Or it could have been an inside job to be blamed on the Russians. Again, wars have been started for less, and I'm not saying that there is going to be a war, but the way things are going, the way the armies of the world are moving right now, it seems very strange, and it just leads me to be cautious when I'm reporting these things. If you're aware of history, then you're aware of how World War I was started. Now, it's common knowledge that the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand was the reason why World War I was started, given the fact that multiple countries was bound by treaties, and in doing so, you had to basically fight for the country which you were aligned with. So, flash forward to now. They say that history always repeats itself. We find ourselves aligned to multiple countries. We have multiple treaties, as does Russia. The United States is bound to NATO if Article 5 is triggered, given if one NATO country is attacked or false flag situation happens, then we can see a global situation. Now, given the Russophobia in our country and the very anti-Russian statements that are happening, that are being said in Western Europe, I wouldn't be surprised if something like this happened down the line. Now, this brings us back to where we are today. Now, as I said numerous times in this video, President Obama has made many statements saying that there would be retaliations against the Russians for supposedly hacking the US election, though no evidence has ever been produced. And I need to stress this. No evidence has ever been produced. And the CIA never went to Congress for the investigation that was supposed to be held. So no evidence was ever produced. And President Obama even came out himself to refute now President-elect Trump's claims that when he was saying that the elections could be hacked, it could be rigged, that this was false, that we had secure systems. Apparently, after the Democratic Party lost, my party lost, this is not what's happening now. Now, I personally think that President Obama and the US government has been involved in very shady things behind the scenes, retaliating towards Russia. This is my opinion. I cannot prove any of this, but given the history of our government, this is what I'm going with. Now, what they have done recently publicly is a whole different story. The U.S. decision to expel 35 Russian diplomats has affected 96 people, including officials themselves and their families. The spokesperson of the Russian Foreign Ministry said Moscow refrained from responding in kind to not ruin the New Year's for American diplomats. The Russian forced to leave the U.S. includes some preschool children, Maria Zakharova said. The U.S. declared 35 Russian diplomats accredited in the U.S. persona non grata, giving them 72 hours to leave the country. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson remarked that while some of the Russian diplomats have been working in the U.S. for years, others arrived as recently as 2 months ago. This did not prevent Washington from expelling them for allegedly trying to interfere with the U.S. election in 2015 and early 2016, which was the reason stated by the U.S. Again, no evidence has ever been provided. This is all speculation on President Obama's part. Now, the Kremlin decided to send a government plane to the U.S. to evacuate the Russians. Some of them reportedly complained that buying plane tickets on such a short notice was problematic. Zakharova said Moscow hoped that the bad timing of the expulsion and all the troubles it caused to the Russian citizens was an oversight rather than intended malice on the part of the White House. Russia refrained from its usual practice of responding to expulsions of its citizens by a foreign power with mirror expulsions of the respective countries' citizens from Russia. We took into serious consideration how our American colleagues and their families would feel, especially their children who are now preparing for the new year and are on their Christmas holidays, Maria Zakharova said. They would have been cut off from their school programs and forced to pack their things and go back to their homeland in 72 hours, so we decided against it. Meanwhile, the Russian envoy to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, called the U.S. move scandalous and cynical. He said that I believe it's simply scandalous that they have decided to target our children. They know that those vacation houses they mentioned in their statements are for our children. It's Christmas, a school break. He said blocking our access there just for the holidays is cynical in my opinion. There are family values. Moscow said that the Obama administration's was a last-ditch effort to provoke the Russian government and that it will decide on the future of relations with the U.S. based on how the administration of President-elect Donald Trump acts. President Obama has also imposed new sanctions against Russia. The first set of sanctions was imposed on Russia on their supposed invasion of Crimea. Now keep in mind, the Crimeans voted for reunification with Russia after the United States helped orchestrate a coup in Ukraine to overthrow the legitimate president there, who was a pro-Russian president, and they installed Poroshenko, who is the current Ukrainian president right now. The U.S. president has also imposed sanctions on 2 Russian intelligence agencies over allegations that they had interfered in the 2016 presidential election in the U.S. by cyber attacks. Russia has denied the hacking accusation. Now, President Vladimir Putin slammed the sanctions as a provocation aimed to further undermine Russian-American relations. He regretted that Obama was ending his term in such a way. He further said in a statement published on the Kremlin's website that Moscow would watch the policy of President-elect Donald Trump when he takes office next month to decide on ties between the 2 countries. Now, I've said this before, and I will repeat this again. There has been one thing that Donald Trump has been consistent on, is improving relations between Russia and the United States. Now, I would think that there is a lot of people on the left and the right, the neocons on the right and the neoliberals on the left. These people are not different in ideologies. They just represent different camps. They both are war hungry crazies who are in our government. Now, war makes people a lot of money. The US needs an enemy so we can continue arming, so we can continue increasing our military budget. Now, it would make a lot of people a lot of money if the US and Russia continue to be at odds. Now, the US and Russia have a very long history outside of the USSR. I think it's a failure on our educational system that Americans don't know about Russia and what they did for us during our Civil War, and how they basically saved our country from falling into the Confederacy. Now, there was an alliance between the US and the Tsar of Russia, which led to the Russian fleet showing up in force in New York and San Francisco. Now, they came in 1863 when Britain and France were on the verge of intervening in our Civil War on the side of the Confederacy, and it would have actually led to a world war. Now, the Secretary of State at the time, William Seward, said that the world would be wrapped up into flames if the Anglo-French would invade on behalf of the Confederacy, but the Russians' presence deterred them from doing that. Now, in the summer of 1863, the battle at Gettysburg and Vicksburg caused the latest crisis to plague the relationship between the US and Britain during the American Civil War. Two powerful ironclad called the Laird Rams, intended for the Confederacy and capable of breaking the Union blockade of the southern ports, were under construction in Britain. Now, the U.S. Ambassador Charles Francis Adams warned the British Foreign Secretary Lord Russell that if the warships were ever delivered to the rebels, it would be superfluous in me to point out to your lordship that this is war. In 1862, an ultimatum was issued to the North and the South to end the war or face more resolute actions from the British. Now, whether this meant military action is unclear, but the implication was the ultimate survival of the Confederacy as a sovereign nation. France, meanwhile, was mirroring Britain's hostile neutrality. Napoleon III had designs on Mexico, and a weak U.S. would give her free hand in America. Union morale was at its lowest in 1863, despite victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg. In the midst of the Laird Rams crisis, rescue came from Tsarist Russia. Now, at the time, Russia was also facing its own insurrection from the Poles, who were supported by Britain and France. Facing the same hostile coalition brought the governments of Lincoln and Tsar Alexander II together. Alexander had also freed the Russian serfs and thus sympathized with the Union's cause. On September of 1863, the Russian Baltic Fleet arrived in New York and the Far East Fleet in San Francisco. The real reason Russia sent her fleet to the U.S. might be self-serving. She didn't want to get bottled up in the cause threatened with war with Britain over Poland if that ever erupted. But its presence nonetheless saved the Union in its hour of desperation. God bless the Russians, exulted Secretary of the Navy Gilden Wells. After the war, Oliver Weldon Holmes hailed Alexander, who was our friend when the world was our foe. The Russians showed themselves willing to fight for the U.S. When the Confederate crusader prepared to attack San Francisco, the Russian admiral gave orders to defend the city in the absence of Union warships. The British realized that Russia was on the side of the U.S., the cost of military intervention would be too high. Besides, the Union victories of 1863 signaled that the Confederacy was a losing cause. Now, had Britain attacked, it would have meant a world war in which the US and Russia allied with perhaps Prussia and Italy, would face Britain, France, supported by Spain or Austria. Now, I'm just saying it's very important that we have historical context when we talk about these things. And I'm not saying that a lot hasn't happened in Russia and a lot hasn't happened in the United States that changed our relations with our countries, given the fact that Russia went the whole communist route and the US emerged as a global power. We had the whole Cold War for numerous years. But we have a very long history with Russia. And I think it would behoove many people in our government, on the left and the right, to keep that in mind before they start their whole Russophobia bullshit that could lead us all into a situation that nobody is prepared for. Because it seems that where this is going, that there are people in our government, not in the Trump administration, because the people who he has surrounded himself with have very positive feelings towards Russia, which is actually makes me happy, because I personally don't want us to see us into a world war with the second strongest country in the world. I think that there are people in our government who will do everything in their power to stop detente between Russia and the United States. I would hope that Donald Trump sees through all of this mess, and I would hope that President Obama's actions in the last weeks, rather, of his administration does not have a trickle effect. So we shall see. I'm the Millennial Revolt. Thank you guys so much for watching, and you have a wonderful day. Bye.